colder air this weekend. So brighter skies on Saturday and Sunday, but with a downturn in temperatures, some rain and hill snow showers.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
On the Mark Stein Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Stein Show.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12, on TV, on radio and online.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Are authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime? With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Good morning, welcome to Bev Turner today on GB News. A packed show for you this morning. I'm going to be talking about Britishness and delving into what our British values might be in 2020 and how they've changed. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, has said that calls for pay rises for nurses and ambulance workers just are not workable. Would a privatised healthcare system change things? And the new house price statistics are out. Our very own economics editor, Liam Halligan, will be here to break them down for us. Who are the winners and who are the losers? That's all coming up after a look at the latest news with Tamsin.
Bev, thank you. Good morning. It's 1 minute past 10. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom.
Dozens of NHS traffic control centres are now operating across England to ease pressures on the health system. More than 40 so-called winter war rooms have been established to help find beds faster for patients. Staff will use data to divert ambulances away from hospitals at capacity to ones with more available space. The plan comes after ambulance workers voted in favour of industrial action. NHS staff will also walk out this month over a pay dispute. Shadow Commons leader Thangam Debonair blamed the winter of discontent on the government for failing to take part in negotiations.
In 13 years of a Labour government between 1997 and 2010, there were no strikes in the NHS. Why? Why were there no strikes? We'd have been negotiating with them for the last few months. We wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be in this position. We'd have been negotiating and working with them. We wouldn't have caused the economic crises that the Tory government caused when they brought forward that disastrous, uncosted, unfunded mini-budget.
UK house prices saw their biggest fall in 2 years. Nationwide's figures show they fell by 1.4% in November, which was the largest month-on-month drop since June 2020. Nationwide says house price growth saw a sharp slowdown, falling to 4.4% from 7.2% in October. British Gas will pay its customers for reducing the amount of electricity they use during peak times to help take pressure off the grid. The energy supplier hopes 100,000 customers sign up to the scheme, which is run by National Grid. Households with a smart meter will also have the chance to sign up. Under the scheme, households will be paid around £4 for every unit of electricity they reduce their consumption by during specific times. Buckingham Palace is facing accusations of institutional racism after a royal aide was forced to resign over comments she made at a reception. Ngozi Fulani, who's founder of a domestic abuse charity, says she was repeatedly asked by Lady Susan Hussey where she really came from. The Prince of Wales, who's in Boston for the Earthshot Prize, says there's no place for racism in society, and his godmother's comments were unacceptable. Kensington Palace says it was right for her to step aside with immediate effect. Rishi Sunak is facing his first electoral test as the voters go to the polls to choose a new City of Chester MP. The vote will replace former Labour MP Chris Matheson, who resigned his common seat after complaints of serious sexual misconduct were upheld by a parliamentary watchdog. It'll be the first Westminster by-election since Boris Johnson and Liz Truss resigned and the financial market chaos that followed after the mini-budget in September. A charity is warning of a homelessness emergency as a new survey suggests private renters under threat of eviction in England increase by more than 3/4 in a year. Shelter says 5% of private renters, around 500,000 people, say they've had an eviction notice or been threatened with eviction in the last month. That's up from 80% from this time last year. Elon Musk's Starlink satellites will be used in a UK government trial aimed at helping remote areas of the country get high-speed internet connections. The technology allows broadband signals to be beamed down to Earth in places where there's limited ground infrastructure or where it would be expensive or difficult to put in place. Moors National Park, Westdale Head in the Lake District and 2 sites in Snowdonia National Park will be involved in the trial. St Ives has been crowned Britain's happiest place to live. The Cornish seaside town overtook Hexham in Northumberland to take the top spot in Rightmove's annual survey, which more than 21,000 people took part in. Rightmove says St Ives scored highly for its sense of community spirit and belonging for its residents. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, it's back to Bev.
Good morning and welcome to Bev Turner today on GB News. Thank you for joining me. The 2021 census data has been rumbling on for a few days. And for the first time ever, fewer than half of people in England and Wales describe themselves as Christian. Birmingham has been revealed as a white minority city by the Office for National Statistics. So in just a moment, I'll give on British values and what we stand for in this great country. And with nurse and ambulance worker strikes potentially looming, Health Secretary Steve Barclay has said that inflation-busting pay rises are just not affordable. I'm going to be debating whether or not a privatised healthcare system would solve all of these financial concerns. And the nationwide housing price index figures were released this morning. Are things becoming more affordable? Will those in their 20s finally be able to comfortably step foot on the property ladder? GB News' economics and business editor Liam Halligan will join me in the studio to delve into all of that and more. And of course, you are my fourth panellist this morning, so email me gbviews@gbnews.uk and please vote in our Twitter poll. In light of Lady Susan Hussey resigning from her role within the royal family over a drinks reception conversation, we are asking you, is it racist to ask someone, where are you from? Just over 90% of you so far say no, that does not illustrate racism. So please do email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me @gbnews to give your opinion on anything else that we're discussing. Now, this week, the 2021 England and Wales census figures revealed that our three biggest cities contain significantly fewer white British residents than they used to. Our Nigel Farage took to Twitter to comment on the new census data and got this response from our former Health Secretary, Sajid Javid. So what? He said. That's it. That is an acceptable response, perhaps in the pub with your mate. But from a former Cabinet Minister and a sitting MP, it's not OK at all. Because stating "so what" in public discourse utterly fails to allow the debates that we must have about the costs and benefits of a rapidly changing British demographic. So what is flippant and aggressive. It reduces the issue to one of melanin, skin pigmentation alone, and needs to be more than that for everyone's sake. Javid fails to recognise that some people are concerned about the erosion of a national British identity, and stifling debate is the best way to cause more resentment and division. Human beings are tribal. To be cast out from one's tribe signalled certain death a few thousand years ago. Luckily, we no longer need fear being eaten by a woolly mammoth if we aren't allowed back in the cave. But our primal instincts will still drive us to gravitate towards familiarity. It doesn't matter if you're a white Yorkshireman moving to the Costa del Sol to live amongst people who also like having fish and chips on a Friday, or a Bangladeshi settling in Tower Hamlets and working with family members in social care. Language, food, jobs, shared cultural landmarks bring people together, and that's okay. All humans need to belong, to feel appreciated, respected, and cared for as a member of a group, whether that is family, friends, a congregation, or a battalion. When we belong, we share values, rituals, and attitudes. We experience feelings of warmth and welcome, and our lives are enriched. This doesn't mean that cross-cultural integration is undesirable, far from it. I expect many of these new statistics reflect interracial marriages and births which occurred here in second and third generation migrant families, melding happily into major cities. But if Sajid Javid's off-the-cuff response suggests that we now live in a post-racial utopia, he's wrong. Riots on the street of Leicester between rival Asian gangs, the banning of a movie which upset some Muslims so much that they formed threatening mobs against the blokes who normally serve the popcorn. As of February 21, there were no black executives in the top 3 roles at Britain's 100 biggest companies. Black people are 3 times more likely to be killed on the streets of London than any other ethnic group. White British boys who qualify for free school meals do significantly worse in educational attainment than any other group at all. However you cut this racial cake, someone has an axe to grind. When a family of Indian descent and a chancellor with a Chinese-born wife moved into Downing Street this year, nobody really batted an eyelid. It was the starkest indication yet that Martin Luther King's dream, in which he famously wished that one day his children would be judged not by the colour of their skin, but by the content of their character, might actually have come to pass, in politics at least. Most of us just want these people in power to carry out their roles with the interests of British taxpayers at the heart of their decisions. We don't care about their gene pool. But where does it all leave Britishness? An elusive quality that slips through our fingers. Too easily we descend into romantic lists, the sound of a cricket bat on a summer's day, a pot of tea with scones, haggis and whiskey, Union Jack tea towels and sandy picnics on a windy day. But Britishness is slippery, as it's different in almost every town. A Londoner looks defensive if you talk to them on the bus. A Mancunian is offended if you don't talk to them on the bus. So we try to sum up British values: democracy, the rule of law, respect and tolerance, individual liberty, all formally summed up in the identity card debate that would roll around every 10 years or so. Do you remember? Dissenting British chaps in suits would say, "I am not a number." But now, the mood has changed. Too many tired, underpaid workers ready to accept that we will all become a QR code with conditions attached, as long as it stops illegal immigration and cuts down on daily inconvenience. Those in power here are dancing to a globalist tune, and old-fashioned Britishness, which prized the individual, does not seem to matter. Most people, whether British born or not, only want to live in harmony and empathy, not conflict and animosity. Somehow, we must lay that path against a rapidly changing landscape. But that journey does not start with a callous "so what?" It starts with a purposeful "so what now?" Right, let me know what you think. GBviews at gbnews.uk. We are also going to be talking with the panel a little bit later about this story that everybody is debating. We've got it on our Twitter poll about Lady Hussey resigning after being quoted as saying something which was deemed to be racist at a drinks party. Right, a story all over the front pages today. The Prince and Princess of Wales have moved to distance themselves from this racism row involving Prince William's godmother that could overshadow their trip to the US. Lady Susan Hussey, who was the late Queen's lady-in-waiting, resigned yesterday over racist comments she made to a black British woman at a Buckingham Palace reception. Our royal reporter Cameron Walker is in Boston, where the Prince and Princess of Wales are preparing for Friday's Earthshot Prize. He's just sent us this report.
Well, this has turned into a bit of a headache for the royal family, particularly the Prince and Princess of Wales, who have arrived in Boston ahead of Prince William's Environmental Earthshot Prize, which is happening on Friday. But even before their plane touched down, there was controversy, and that is all because Prince William's godmother asked a British-born black domestic abuse campaigner where she really came from during a reception at Buckingham Palace. Now, the accusations were aired on Twitter, and then Buckingham Palace had to quickly, and did very quickly, release a statement saying that they take the incident extremely seriously. They have reached out to Ngozi Fulani, who is the advocate at the reception, to see if she wanted to discuss in person her experiences at that reception. Buckingham Palace went on to say the individual concerned wishes to express their profound apologies for the hearse cause and stepped away from her honorary role. Now, another indication that the royal family is taking this extremely seriously. I now understand that Prince William very much agrees that his godmother should have stepped away from her role. And Prince William's spokesperson also released a statement. Now, he said, "I was really disappointed to hear about the guest's experience at Buckingham Palace. The comments were unacceptable, and it is right the individuals have stepped aside with immediate effect." Now, despite another royal race row and the rain quite literally dampening people's spirits here, the Prince and Princess were greeted by crowds from across America. People had travelled as far as Alaska to see them, and this is what Prince William said to the crowds.
Thank you to all the hardy Bostonians braving the rain this evening. 60 years ago, President John F. Kennedy's moonshot speech laid down a challenge to American innovation and ingenuity. "We choose to go to the moon," he said, "not because it is easy, but because it is hard." It was that moonshot speech that inspired me to launch the Earthshot Prize, with the aim of doing the same for climate change as President Kennedy did for the space race.
Now, today, the Prince and Princess will be visiting one of the most deprived areas of Massachusetts and meeting vulnerable young people. They'll also be seeing how Boston has become a global leader when it comes to climate change and tackling the climate crisis. And no doubt Palace aides are hoping that this one incident is the only thing that's going to distract from Prince William's Earthshot Prize.
Thank you, Cameron Walker there in Boston. Now, don't forget to vote in the Twitter poll. we are running at the moment. I'm asking you, is it racist to ask someone where you are from? This is in light of Lady Susan Hussey resigning from her job for asking that very question. You've been getting in touch already on this. Lots of you have been tweeting. So far, 90.9% of you are saying no, it is not racist to ask where you are from. Some of the comments, though, Narinder Kerr, that's a voice that you will know from here on GB News. Narinder has said it's not that simple. The way in which she was asked was clearly racist and rude, repeatedly asking and moving her hair back, not OK. Morrison has said, not racist, maybe rude, pompous, and you shouldn't think it correct to touch someone's hair, but not racist. She's dressed in her cultural dress, which is great, of course. She was asking about her heritage. Now, this is because this charity worker had very long dreads, and Lady Hussey, who couldn't see the name badge, apparently moved to the side to see the name badge. Personally, I think Prince William should have taken a stronger stance on this. He should not have thrown Lady Hussey under the bus. I think I would have said nobody was there to explain what happened here. We're taking one person's word over another. And yes, of course, it sounds like it was probably a little bit clumsy, but the woman that she was talking to knew what she meant when she said, where are you from? And she said, well, I'm London born and bred, but my family were originally from wherever. And that's it. The conversation moves on. Anyway, let me know what you think. GBviews at gbnews.uk. After the break, I'm going to be welcoming my panel onto the show. I'm delighted to be joined by the former Labour MP Stephen Pound, journalist and author James Bloodworth, and broadcaster Johnny Gould. Now it's time for a quick break.
Hello, a very good morning to you. I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's a cold start out there for many of us. A frost in places, foggy for some as well, damp for others. So a mixture across the UK at the moment. But we've all got something in common, and that is a large area of high pressure extending from the east. That's mostly keeping these weather fronts at bay, but one such feature has snuck in from the west to affect Scotland, Northern Ireland and northwest England during the last 24 hours. Now, for Scotland and the far north of England, it is a damp and dull start to the day, the rain continuing through much of the day here. Northern Ireland, brighter skies arrive, but for much of England and Wales, dense fog patches first thing. Could be tricky on the roads, for example. The fog does slowly lift and brighter skies do emerge in the south and across Wales, where we see that happening 7 to 11 Celsius, but where we do see some stubborn fog persisting into the afternoon, 2 to 5 Celsius. It is actually a little milder for Western Scotland and Northern Ireland, however, because we've got a bit more of a southerly breeze here. That breeze will push the rain into eastern Scotland, the northeast of England by the end of the night tonight. But elsewhere across the UK, a lot of cloud remains. Low cloud through central parts, some dense fog patches by dawn, and again a touch of frost in places. Now, the brightest skies first thing tomorrow will be across parts of Wales and the southwest. Northern Ireland as well faring well for sunshine, and eventually western Scotland. The rain in the far northeast eventually peters away, so most places will see a dry Friday, and the fog in the south will also lift. I think more likely to lift compared with recent days because the breeze from the east is picking up. Now, that breeze will become an increasingly dominant feature of the forecast over the next few days. It will tend to prevent a fog and frost forming at night, but it will also bring colder air this weekend. So brighter skies on Saturday and Sunday, but with a downturn in temperatures, some rain and hill snow showers.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something weird happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak.
Stop talking. My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
And it's about standards and public life. No, I'll tell you what's hypocrisy, Narinda.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin.
We believe in the UK.
No bias, no censorship.
It just doesn't make sense to me. He wasn't doing his job as Chancellor.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
Very good morning, it's 10:22. You're watching GB News. Thank you ever so much for joining me. This is Bev Turner today. My panel are here this morning. I'm delighted to be joined by former Labour MP Stephen Pound, author James Bloodworth. Hello, James. Broadcaster and journalist Johnny Gould. Now, gentlemen, Johnny, this first story. 70% of English water industry is in foreign ownership. You see these headlines, these numbers. 70% of our water is run by foreign companies. What's going on?
They're referencing it, Bev, as the world's piggy bank. And, of course, you look at the history of this. You go back 30 years when they were privatised and they talked about the opportunity for every one of us to become H2 owners, was the term that they used. The reality is, when these figures are to be looked at, it's anything but. And when we say foreign ownership, what we're referencing is foreign investment firms, private equity, pension funds, businesses lodged in tax havens. So it's a whole mixture, and they own over 70% of the industry. To put that more specifically, Severn Trent Water, for instance, a third of that is owned by Qatar Investment Authority. Immediately you start to get nervous. Thames Water, just shy of 10% owned by a subsidiary of the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, 8.7% owned by the Chinese. And the trouble is that history has proven that, you know, we have more concerns about investments from certain parts of the world than others. The reality also that we should point out is that the majority shareholder in all the water companies of Great Britain are from investment from America, which is not something that makes us nervous by comparison. So you sort of have to question whether that's appropriate or not. But the reality is that when you've got the sort of stories that we're seeing about sewage being laden off into our waters illegally, clearly illegally, you start to ask the question, well, how are these companies being allowed to do this? Why are they not answerable? And is part of the problem the fact that such a significant percentage of the ownership is elsewhere in foreign authorities?
James, do you think this wouldn't bother us if we felt like we were getting a really great service at a good price? Is that the problem? It's the juxtaposition of those two facts, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I think accountability is much harder. When you've got the Chinese state owning a chunk of our water supply, when you have very rich individuals who reside in tax havens, it's very hard to hold some of the individuals accountable when you have leaks in the waterways, when you have lots and lots of money being used for repairs, etc. And, I mean, the waterways were privatised because we were told that it would be more efficient in private ownership than public ownership. But I think there are certain things, such as water, such as perhaps arguably the railways, where it is a public service and it just doesn't sit well with lots of people that you have Qatar, you have China, essentially seeking profit from our water system when the British state could run it.
I don't know whether any of you know this, but do the Brits own much of other people's
No, we don't.
supplies?
It's interesting to hear, because we're all socialists now, aren't we? All realise it was a dreadful mistake. But look, I tell you what really terrifies me. One of the things that horrifies me, my neighbours, is the cost of energy over the winter. So it's the cost of the utilities. Who owns the utilities? Électricité de France, they're the biggest owners. So imagine, we do get into a situation, the Ukraine war is dragging on, power supplies are very, very low, the actual amount of energy they've got is low. Are the French going to actually prioritise us over them? Is it even going to be an equal playing field? Of course they're not. And that really worries me. We do not control our utilities, gas, water and electricity. There's something seriously and profoundly Renationalise them, I say.
I think, do you know what? Every time this comes up, apparently it's about 70% of the people in this country would like to see our big state providers, our utility providers, renationalised. I don't think it'll ever happen, though, Johnny, will it? This horse has very much bolted.
But I'm not
Shoot me down.
No, it shouldn't, and it shouldn't be done. At the end of the day, you've only got to look at history to see what a mess we make when something is nationalised. What I'd like to see is some kind of a sort of hybrid mix between the two extremes, because that's what we have.
Yeah.
We just have another extreme, and quite clearly it's not fit for purpose. There has to be accountability, so there has to be some kind of a system that we install whereby the extremes of private ownership, and the point that Stephen makes is a very good one, about that revenue is the priority when it's all about shareholders.
Yeah.
And that can't be right when you're talking about a utility that is a basic right of any British citizen.
Yeah.
So there has to be some kind of a hybrid reality that we can find where there are checks and balances, but at the same time, hopefully the private sector is a more efficient model, and it's certainly proved to be.
I think the Europeans have shown, though, that there can be involvement of the state in things like the railways, things like the utilities, and run those services very well. I think there are certain things which are natural monopolies. So with the railways, for example, you can never have true competition on the railways because we can't let the railways go down like a normal business. So the state always has to step in. So you end up with the state spending massive subsidies to basically support private companies.
Yeah.
So you get the worst of both worlds.
Yeah. Talking about terrible value for money, James, this awful story. So this is how much was lost in fraud in 3 COVID schemes, as Rishi Sunak's Eat Out to Help Out scheme recorded a 9.5% rate of fraud, according to the HMRC. This feels like it might just be the tip of the iceberg in terms of how people ripped us off during COVID.
Yeah, I mean, the total value of fraud in the 3 COVID schemes, totaled 4.5 billion, which is a hell of a lot of money, and the taxpayers only likely to get back 1.1 billion, according to the HMRC.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was such an unprecedented time. I think that, I think that some of the schemes that the government came up with, it was kind of on the hoof. There was always, none of them were going to be perfect. There was a situation where the economy was doing very badly because people weren't going out spending anymore. And so I was quite sympathetic to the Eat Out to Help Out scheme at the time. But as we can see, it was subject to massive fraud. I think a better idea would have been to simply given furlough to the businesses directly rather than encouraging people to go out, because we did see another wave of COVID shortly after Eat Out to Help Out.
Well, I'm not sure I'd agree with that. So I would say we should have always been taking the proportionate measures needed for a virus which was affecting predominantly the very, very elderly and looking after them with focused care. But, Stephen, this story smacks of huge naivety on the part of who? Rishi Sunak, at the part of the Treasury at the time, giving out this money. I remember chatting, you only had to go into any pub. I remember chatting to a landlord about the fact that he was fiddling the books at the time and how easy it was. He said, I just submit some receipts, I tell them it's for food and they pay me.
This is almost nothing. It's a drop in the ocean compared to the PPE contracts.
Oh, yeah.
The amount of money, basically Matt Hancock meets a friend down the pub and next thing you know, they've got a £34 million contract. And obviously the ongoing situation with one of the PRSs in...
Baroness Sloan, yeah.
Well, I wasn't sure if we could mention her
name.
Yeah,
we can mention it. It's all over the papers.
Yeah, okay.
Well, it's 29 million quid is funneled into her children's bank accounts.
I have to say, James is absolutely spot. My son's an electrician, self-employed electrician, and he actually got money from the government to keep his business going, to keep the lights on, and that was absolutely the right thing to do. So it wasn't a question of furlough, it was a question of support.
Yeah.
In the hospitality industry, which after all is a motor of the economy, it employs people who then spend money. And so we should have done it that way, instead of having this photo opportunity of Dishy Rishi, with a plate of profiteroles passing, round in the pub. That was the problem. And I think who's to blame? Let's cut the government a little bit of slack. It was panic stations. I mean, we were actually looking at Armageddon. We'd all seen these, these outbreak films about, people, the country was going.
Yeah, we followed the rule of China, which we'd never done before in the history of the world, and we ripped up the pandemic playbook.
Look at them today. Look at us today.
Yeah, they're laughing.
Who got it right?
We don't really know what's going on there. Thank God we aren't still following China.
Yeah. Oh,
but we definitely were triggered by what the images that they were revealing to us.
I was quite attracted to the Swedish model at one stage because that seemed to be a good idea.
And it has proven to be so because their economy is
marginally
not quite.
Yeah. Oh no, they're today they're in a far better position than we are.
Yeah.
Herd immunity was that difficult thing because the problem with that is you're going to have to let some people die. And politically, politicians couldn't stomach that. And Boris Johnson actually said that at one stage. We cannot simply afford to have people die on our watch. But the reality is that's what happened, And that's what's ended it.
What should they do about this fraud, though, Johnny Gould? Because I guess you're a self-employed freelance man working largely in the entertainment industry. You didn't get anything, did you, from the government? And you would never have tried to rip them off.
No, but I did get some support,
Right.
actually. I didn't get support through as a freelancer. And I didn't have an issue with that because there were certain restrictions if you'd earn over 50,000 over 3 years. And I think that was the right decision.
Absolutely.
My partner, who had set up a business as my manager, she fell down the hole of not getting any support because she'd only set a business up in the last 18 months and hadn't made a tax return. So she was another of the exemptions. So there were an awful lot of people, but I think the delay was the frustration for people in my industry. I had 3 jobs in 19 months. It was brutal.
Yeah.
But many people were in a far worse position than I was, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And I'm pleased to hear the lads here saying that, you know, I think give the government a break. It was a unique situation that none of us had ever faced. None of us knew what was the playbook, what was the right thing to do. And so many of these measures were trying to offer support. And in hindsight, yes, we've looked and we've seen that huge fraud. I mean, I saw one story. A restaurant claimed to have a record month in sales during Eat Out to Help Out, but at the same time, they supposedly furloughed their whole staff.
Yeah.
And they didn't expect them to connect the dots. I mean, and that, at the end of the day, that's just a criminal intent of which you can't blame a government for that.
Yeah.
You can only blame the individual that carried out the crime.
There are always people who take advantages of these schemes, but I think they also saved a lot of businesses as well. So, I mean, if we can claw some of the money back, is it still worth it?
And it might have saved them temporarily. I'm not quite sure how they are now with their fuel bills, particularly I'm thinking pubs, you know, restaurants, the hospitality industry. They've been hit brutally in the longer term. But, right, thanks, guys. That's only stage 1. We've got 2 more to go at least, so don't go anywhere. Now, after the break, with nurses and ambulance workers set to strike over pay and the Health Secretary Steve Barclay saying the government can't afford it, I'm going to be asking whether or not a privatised healthcare system would solve all of this. That's after the news.
Hello, good morning. It's 10:33. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Dozens of NHS traffic control centres are now operating across England to ease pressures on the health system. More than 40 so-called winter war rooms have been established to help find beds faster for patients. Staff will use data to divert ambulances away from hospitals at capacity to ones with more space. The plan comes after ambulance workers voted in favour of industrial action. Nurses are also set to walk out later this month over a pay dispute. British Gas will pay its customers for reducing the amount of energy they use during peak times to help take pressure off the grid. The UK's largest supplier hopes 100,000 customers will sign up to the scheme. Households will be paid around £4 for every unit of electricity they cut their consumption by during peak times. UK house prices have seen their biggest fall in 2 years, with nationwide figures showing they dropped 1.4% in November. That's after a month-on-month fall in October. The average house price was £263,788. St Ives has been crowned Britain's happiest place to live. The Cornish seaside town overtook Hexham in Northumberland to take the top spot in Rightmove's annual survey. Rightmove says St Ives scored highly for its sense of community spirit and belonging for its residents. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Well, here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2094 and €1.1628. And the price of gold is £1,465 and 11 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,580 points.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deems & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store? You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
There's a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions. I have no time for cultural totalitarianism. We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12, on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Very good morning. Thank you for joining me. It's 10:37. This is Bev Turner Today on GB News. Now, you have been sending in your views, which are, of course, extremely important to me. This is talking about this royal racism dispute. A lot of you are agreeing that this has been blown out of all proportion. Carol says, don't you think it would have been nice to hear her side of this? I presume this is Lady Hussey. She's 83, and I don't believe her asking was racist. I think she was probably more interested in her ancestry and said it wrong at her age. I totally agree. Trevor said racism is disgusting in any form. Of course it is. But we'll have to steer clear of institutional offending. And Chris said it's not racist to ask someone where someone is from or even where their parents are from, but it's how it's asked. It's a case of not what you say, it's how you say it. A simple rule of life. Now, of course, the woman who is making the allegations against Lady Hussey does have a bit of form in this area. She sent tweets out previously saying that Meghan Markle was a victim of domestic violence because of the institutional racism in the royal family. I can't help but think maybe she's used this as a little opportunity, perhaps. But unfortunately, it backfires because all it does is increase racial tensions. It doesn't help them. Now, moving on. Strikes, NHS, all over the place, aren't they? Health Secretary Steve Barclay's put his foot down, saying that unions' pay demands are not affordable. This comes alongside nursing strikes, and Unison has announced that ambulance workers across England are set to strike before Christmas after voting in favour of industrial action over pay and staffing. This is what Steve Barclay said. He said, I'm hugely grateful for the hard work and dedication of the NHS staff and deeply regret that some will be taking industrial action, which is in nobody's best interest as we approach a challenging winter. So would all of these disputes take place if we had a fully privatised healthcare system? So here to discuss this is Christopher Snowdon from the Institute of Economic Affairs. We've got Benjamin Loughnane, a research fellow at the Bow Group, and GP Dr Ken Aswani. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me. This is a conversation which has been had for several decades now. Christopher Snowdon, let me come to you first. Why are we in this dreadful position as we face another Christmas with an NHS in crisis?
Well, partially because of the strikes, as you mentioned, which have been caused by inflation and our inability to keep up pay in real terms, partly because of the COVID backlog. But also, these are not new problems. We have a winter crisis in this country every single year. Other countries generally do not. We are an exception. We're exceptionally bad. And I think the reason for that is the NHS is a vast government monopoly. And like all vast government monopolies, it's badly run and inefficient.
So should it just be entirely privatised? What does that look like to you, Chris?
Well, I'd like it to look more like Holland or France or Spain or, most of the rest of the world, where the government doesn't actually own and run all the hospitals. It just makes sure that people can get healthcare. So there's nothing special about universal healthcare free at the point of use. The vast majority of developed countries have that, but what they don't have is a government actually owning and running the system. There's no reason why the hospitals can't be privately run, as GP surgeries currently are, by the way. And it's also good for staff because, you look at this current situation, nurses demanding 19% pay rise, going on strike. In a private system, if they're not happy with the terms with their employer, they go to another hospital, they go to another private healthcare provider. You have competition. So the competition works for the staff, but also, of course, most of all, it works for the customer or the patient.
Let me come to you then, Dr. Ken Aswani. You're a GP. Christopher makes it all sound incredibly commonsensical. What do you think would be lost if we had that system?
Yeah, I mean, there's always a sort of a debate about, whether we'd be better off with a privatised health system. But I think the health system that we've got, certainly the NHS, is admired sort of all over the world. And the costs of running a health service, it is expensive. There's technology, increased sort of older population, and people are living longer. But all the research I've seen is the most cost-effective way of running a health service. There's lots of dangers of trying to privatise a health service. One of it is that, we can increase sort of inequalities. So, the ones that can afford it get the service, but obviously not so much the ones that are not able to. The other aspect of it is we do have a number of national programs, such as immunisation programs and so on, that actually keep most of the population quite healthy. So I think looking at the evidence, I think, sort of the NHS free at the point of use is I think, the most cost-effective way of running it. I'm sure we could always improve and transform, but I think that has to be a fundamental tenet of, how we move forward and how we try and sort of reform and get more effective at what we do.
Benjamin, if I can come to you, by any definition, it isn't really working at the moment for most people. When the NHS works, it is the greatest in the world, and it is incredible, really. And it does feel a bit anachronistic that we still have a system which will, treat anybody walking through the door at no cost to themselves. What's the solution from your point of view?
Well, we've seen there's a vast amount of waste and inefficiency within the NHS, and especially over the past couple of years when we had lockdown, for example, and people were missing cancer screenings because it basically became the COVID health service rather than the National Health Service actually dealing with all a broad range of all ailments. It really became very focused on one thing, and that's one of the pitfalls when you have a nationalised service, when you have something which isn't private, where there's no competition, where people can't say, if you aren't providing the services that are required, we can go elsewhere. You remove that choice, and it makes it a lot harder for people to then hold the service to account. But there is a middle way. You can keep the service free at the point of delivery, whilst also having a level of privatisation within how those contracts are bidded on and who provides them. And if you were to keep it so that it was still free at the point of delivery, but have private healthcare providers providing those services, then there'd be more of a profit incentive, there'd be more competition, you'd get better value for money, you'd provide a better service for the taxpayer, and it wouldn't harm the fact that it's free for all people who need it.
Are we getting value for money, Christopher, do you think, in any way?
No, the NHS is a huge money pit. I mean, the idea that it's chronically underfunded is absolutely untrue. In the past, it has had a bit less than the OECD or the EU average, which it should do, by the way. If it's so efficient, it should require less money. Now it's getting way above the OECD average. It's getting a huge amount. It's obviously got a massive boost during COVID, but it's not looking like it's going to be getting much less in the future. In fact, it's just going to keep going up. Jeremy Hunt's already announced another £6 billion for that. It's endless, and who knows what the money's spent on. It certainly doesn't seem to be going on hospital beds, doctors and nurses. We have far fewer doctors and far fewer hospital beds than most countries, and that's part of the reason you have this problem with bed blocking and ambulances not able to drop people off at the hospital. The whole thing's a complete mess, and it's not admired around the world. Most people around the world have no idea what the NHS is, and when foreign visitors come here or move here, they're amazed at the pride that we have in this below average healthcare system, and there's a staggered that anybody would be impressed at being able to see a doctor on the same day, for example. So no, it's not a mad, and insofar as we admire it in Britain, it's largely because we're so parochial. We haven't looked around the rest of the world, apart from America, which is the only country anybody seems to be familiar with when it comes to healthcare.
Ken, do you think that we've all just lowered our expectations dramatically over the last 2 years when it comes to the NHS? As Chris was saying there, you can't necessarily, almost nobody can get a GP appointment on the same day anymore. You've got extraordinary waiting times at A&E. We're seeing ambulance drivers about to go on strike when we've already got extraordinary wait times for paramedics. Is it time to just say, you know what, it's in intensive care, but we're going to do a DNR on it any minute now?
Yeah, I mean, I think nobody would sort of argue with the challenges of the NHS, and I think they've been described really well. I think it's sort of the areas we can reform. So, for example, if it's free at the point of use, and, you know, sort of, for example, sort of private hospitals and sort of so on, well, that happens at the moment. I mean, we do refer patients to sort of private hospitals or other services, and they're part of the mix. And in a sense, you know, they do compete at that level. There are sort of changes afoot on how we look after, because a lot of patients that get admitted to hospital are often the frail elderly. And actually, if we have more effective, say, multidisciplinary team working so we can keep patients at home, that is both cost effective but ultimately better for the patient as well. There are lots of initiatives, say for long-term conditions, diabetes, that actually through lifestyle measures and patients are supported to look after themselves, that can be really, really cost effective. So it's a series of mechanisms that we get more efficient and transform the way we work. And we do need to do that because, you know, it is a precious resource. But I think we've got to be careful of trying to think there's kind of one solution, really. And sometimes privatising fits in that. We think it's a solution. I don't think it's a solution. I think we need to sort of tackle it in different ways, but get the benefits. But yes, we do need sort of, you know, much better access. And actually, we don't need sort of heavy sort of challenges that we've got at the moment ongoing. We do need to resolve those.
Benjamin, if I can give the last word to you as a research fellow, you look into your crystal ball. What does the future look like for the NHS and what sort of timescale would you attach to that?
Well, I think we all agree that the NHS needs reform. We might not agree on what reform it needs or how, but we do agree that there is areas of waste which need to be solved. But the problem is, the moment you've got a Conservative government turning around saying we're going to reform the NHS, it's like a sacred cow. People go, oh no, don't touch it. You can't do anything to change it at all. But there need to be changes made. If you really love the NHS and you want it to be a successful service for all people in this country, you need to make reforms. You need to adapt to the times. You need to change. You need to get rid of the waste and trim the fat. And the problem is when you have a government which is kowtow so easily to the left-wing press and refuse to do anything that might get them in hot water with The Guardian, they're never going to have the gumption to actually turn around and do this. So I hope that I'm wrong.
And of course, gentlemen, and of course, it is a very hot potato when it comes to the electorate and voting intentions, is it not? And I think that's probably why successive governments have dared not go there. Thank you so much to all three of you. Christopher Snowdon there, Benjamin Loughnane and Dr. Ken Aswani. We could have been talking about that all day. But there is another very important issue to discuss. UK house prices saw their biggest monthly fall for more than 2 years in November, as it looks like rising interest rates are putting off buyers. Now, these figures were released by Nationwide UK this morning, and I'm delighted to say that I'm joined in the studio by not only our business editor, Liam Halligan, but also Freddie Poser, Director of Priced Out UK. Hello, Freddie. Nice to meet you.
Nice to be here in person.
I've interviewed you down the line a few times. Have you been showing him round?
Oh, Freddie knows his way around studios in this country.
Right, Liam Halligan, what does this news mean for people who want to buy a house?
As you say, Bev, house prices fell in November. According to the Nationwide, they dropped 1.4% compared to October. They're still up 4.4% compared to November 2021, so they're up on an annual basis. But this monthly fall is the biggest monthly fall since June 2020, which was the height of lockdown, of course, when a lot of housing transactions stalled. A lot of it is rising mortgage rates. Back in January this year, the average mortgage rate on a 5-year fix was 3.7%. The average during November was 5.4%, so that's a big increase. It's partly because the mini budget back in September sent debt markets slightly mad. It's also because there's a general long-term rise in interest rates, so it's not just all about the mini budget. And what's happening now, housing chains tend to start with a first-time buyer coming in and buying something, and then people trade up and up and up, and that's how the housing market registers transactions. Transactions are falling because first-time buyers aren't coming to the market, because even with the help of the so-called Bank of Mum and Dad, and a third of all first-time buyers now have access to the Bank of Mum and Dad, a half in London and the South East, which is obviously deeply unfair if you haven't got property-owning parents. But those first-time buyers now, because of these interest rate rises, instead of spending about 35% of their monthly wage on their mortgage, it's more like 45% because of the extra debt costs. And that means that the housing market is stalling, so prices are falling.
It's crazy, isn't it? Because even amongst all of the up and downs and the vicissitudes, let's say, of the last thank you very much, of the last 2.5 years, the house market remained buoyant. They did quite a good job, the government, of making sure that wasn't too disrupted. They had the stamp duty, March 2020.
Yeah.
Do you remember they cut stamp duty to keep that market going? And now they're like going to mess this up as well, aren't they, Liam?
Well, look, for a lot of people, they want their house price to keep rising, but we're not really a nation of homeowners anymore. We're below the average of the EU nations in terms of our home ownership. It's about 60% now, down from over 70% 10 or 15 years ago. And a lot of that home ownership, as Freddie Poser will tell us, and I feel his pain, I've written a book about this, is among the over 60s. There are more houses now in the UK that are owned outright than are owned with a mortgage.
Yes.
So
I saw that statistic. That blew my mind.
Yeah, so much of the housing stock is in the hands of the over 60s that young people can't get on the housing ladder. The average age that people buy their first home is rising, if indeed they can buy their first home at all. Freddie's generation, my kids' generation, with all respect, they're the least likely to own their own home.
You're never going to own your own house, Freddie.
Than any generation since the Great Depression.
Yeah, I think that there is huge issues here, and as Liam says, it sort of constantly come on to discuss, house price growth has slowed, or in this case, gone into reverse a bit. But we're still up on the year. We're significantly up on before the pandemic. House prices have not, stayed steady. They have absolutely skyrocketed. We've actually just gone through 2 or 3 years of really fast house price growth, especially in London and the South East, where people really want to and need to live so they can work at, well-paying jobs. And we were also seeing this not just in the first-time buyer market, but in the rental market, where rents across London are up about 20% over the year. So the housing crisis is a supply crisis as well. We've got it sort of mediated through this how cheap money is, how cheaply can you get your mortgage. But the underlying crisis is we haven't built enough homes. And
isn't it also because your generation spend all your money on like takeaways and avocados and things, Freddie? Isn't that the problem?
Absolutely is not. That is absolutely
you
scurrilous.
Can't save you lot, can you? That's the problem.
We know that people sort of my generation, young people are spending upwards of 35-40% of their post-tax income on rent. In London, it's up to 50%. I've got friends who are leaving London at the moment because they've just been asked to pay a 33% rental increase on the same flat. 33% increase.
You've got a glint in your eye, Bev, and I know you want to get a discussion going, but Freddie's absolutely right on this. My inbox is full of people, with all respect, Telegraph column readers, GB News viewers and listeners saying, in my day we had interest rates of 15%. These youngsters, they're spending too much money on Netflix and avocado sandwiches. I'm afraid it's complete nonsense. As Freddie's just said, Freddie's generation, my kids' generation, they're spending a higher share of their post-tax income with mortgage rates at 3 or 4% or 5% than my parents were paying in the late 70s, 80s, than I was paying in the mid-90s when interest rates were like 10 or 15%. Because, why? Even though interest rates are lower now, the underlying house, it used to be 3 or 4 times average incomes. It's now 8 or 10 times average incomes. And in London, it's 12 and 15 times average incomes. And here's the thing, Bev. These guys are paying as much or more than previous generations at these low interest rates, and interest rates could still go up.
Yes, even further.
They could still go up even more. So the whole avocado sandwich Netflix thing, I know it's a good debating point, but it can easily be blown away by the evidence.
It can. The other thing and I'd love to know your thoughts on this, Freddie, isn't this also partly because we have terrible transport networks in this country? And what I mean by that is, yes, if you want to work in London, because there are lots of quite cool, sexy jobs in London that people want to do, but if it was easier to get on the housing market just outside of Reading, just outside of Woking, like somewhere outside of London, but you could get in easily, would that make life easier?
Well, I'd counsel you to look at the house prices just outside of Woking and just outside of Reading. In fact, even in places where it's basically just about possible to commute into London, we see London prices. In fact, in the whole southeast, we've got one sort of regional housing crisis of people desperate to live just within hours of London.
Train journeys.
Exactly. I mean, these are not short commutes. We're not talking about people who live on the Jubilee line here.
Yeah.
So actually, the only solution is going to be to improve the supply.
Yeah.
Because in the long term, as Liam says, we've actually gone through 10 years now of historically low interest rates, and people seem to have forgotten what an interest rate is, but that's coming back. Even if the mini-budget snarl goes away, we're going to be seeing at least 5%, mortgage rates for a while now. And without fixing supply, people simply won't be able to afford a home.
Freddie's on the money, if I may say so, to coin a phrase. We do have a chronic shortage of housing in this country. We need to build around 250, 300,000 houses a year just to hit our natural demography, let alone with more immigration. And we haven't built houses at that level, Bev, since the 90s. And that is the fundamental problem. And we should just say we're a national news organisation here. We focused on London and the South East because that's the epicentre of the crisis. But this is not just a South East problem. In the North West, in the West Country, in the Midlands, even in the North East, where house prices with respect have traditionally been lower, there are kids who can't buy homes because the houses are just too expensive because we're not building enough.
And the implications of that are huge for everybody, aren't they? Even with parents who've still got kids in their 20s and 30s being at home, the ramifications are huge. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Freddie Posey there and Liam Halligan. Right, that's the end of our first hour. That went quickly. We're going to be right back with more after this short break.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
I think I've seen probably quite enough of Matt Hancock to last me a lifetime.
I'll also be getting to know you better, travelling to find out what you think about the politicians who are fighting for your vote.
They've got to get this country back on track.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. only on GB News, on TV, radio and online.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Very good morning. Welcome back to Bev Turner today on GB News, TV, radio and online. Strikes, strikes and more strikes. It's all we're hearing about at the moment. There will be strikes every day in this country now until Christmas. We're going to be hearing from two former cabinet ministers about how we resolve the rising strike culture. And I'll get my views from the panel about the royal family and whether Lady Susan Hussey was racist for asking the question, "Where are you from?" to a charity worker at an event. That's all coming up after a look at the latest news with Tamsin.
Bev, thank you. Good morning. It's 11 o'clock. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Dozens of NHS traffic control centres are now operating across England to ease pressures on the health system. More than 40 so-called winter war rooms have been established to help find beds faster for patients. Staff will use data to divert ambulances away from hospitals at capacity to ones with more available space. The plan comes after ambulance workers voted in favour of industrial action. NHS staff will also walk out this month over a pay dispute. Shadow Commons leader Thangam Debonair blamed the winter of discontent on the government for failing to take part in negotiations.
In 13 years of a Labour government between 1997 and 2010, there were no strikes in the NHS. Why? Why were there no strikes? We'd have been negotiating with them for the last few months. We wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be in this position. We'd have been negotiating and working with them. We wouldn't have caused the economic crises that the Tory government caused when they brought forward that disastrous, uncosted, unfunded mini-budget.
British Gas has announced it will pay customers for reducing the amount of energy they use during peak times. The energy supplier is the biggest to join the scheme, which is designed to ease pressure on the grid. The company hopes 100,000 customers will agree to take part. Households will be paid around £4 for every unit of electricity they cut their consumption by at specific times. UK house prices have seen their biggest fall in 2 years. Nationwide figures show they dropped 1.4% in November. That's after a month-on-month fall in October. The average house price was £263,788. Buckingham Palace is facing accusations of institutional racism after a royal aide was forced to resign over comments she made at a reception. Ngozi Fulani, who's founder of a domestic abuse charity, says she was repeatedly asked by Lady Susan Hussey where she really came from. Kensington Palace says it was right for her to step aside with immediate effect. Rishi Sunak is facing his first electoral test as the voters go to the polls to choose a new City of Chester MP. The vote will replace former Labour MP Chris Matheson, who resigned from his Commons seat after complaints of serious sexual misconduct were upheld by a parliamentary watchdog. It'll be the first Westminster by-election since Boris Johnson's resignation and the financial market chaos that followed Liz Truss's mini-budget in September. A charity is warning of a homelessness emergency after private renters under threat of eviction has increased by more than 3/4 in a year. Shelter says 5% of private renters in England, that's around 500,000 people, say they've had an eviction notice or been threatened with eviction in the last month. That's up from 80% from this time last year. St Ives has been crowned Britain's happiest place to live. The Cornish seaside town overtook Hexham in Northumberland to take the top spot in Rightmove's annual survey, which more than 21,000 people took part in. Rightmove says St Ives scored highly for its sense of community spirit and belonging for its residents. St Ives resident and winner of The Voice, Molly Hockick, says the town has a special atmosphere.
It's just an amazing place. It's got such a local, supportive atmosphere. Every time you wake up in the morning, all you can hear is the seagulls, no roads, no cars, just fresh air and the seagulls. And we've got everything. We've got shops, local bakers, sports clubs.
This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, though, back to Bev.
Good morning. Welcome back to Bev Turner today on GB News. It is the season of strikes, which could see a wave of walkouts that could disrupt services every day until Christmas. This comes as more than 10,000 ambulance workers become the latest group to vote for industrial action. But what is the government going to do to tackle this? A new survey from the NHS has found that 6 in 10 older teens in England have possible eating problems. And this seems to be rising at an alarming rate. I'm going to be joined a little bit later by a nutritionist and a behavioural psychologist to talk about why. And I'm going to be joined also by my fantastic commentators back in the studio in about 20 minutes for analysis of the day's biggest stories, including news that Brexit has cost UK households £5.8 billion in higher food bills. Can that be as simple as that? And of course, this show is nothing without you and your views. Today on Twitter, we've got a poll asking you, is it racist to ask someone, where are you from? Cast your vote. Please do email me on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews to give your opinion on that and everything else that we're discussing. So Britain is set to suffer the worst strike chaos every day until Christmas. This comes as trade unions seek to bring the country to a halt in a new winter of discontent. Yesterday, Rishi Sunak attacked Sir Keir Starmer's support for trade unions. But is he right? Joining me now is our political correspondent, Tom Harwood. Tom, bring us the latest on this. Who is set to strike and why are there so many strikes happening?
Do you know what? If I was going to list off all the different organisations and unions that were planning strikes over the next 4 weeks, I don't think we'd have any time left in your programme at all. There are simply so many, whether it comes to people in the NHS or in other services. We are seeing a huge raft of strikes that are going to befall this country in the next few weeks. Trains are just another one that are incredibly pertinent to many, many people. And what we're seeing really is a new wave of industrial action reflecting the troublesome cost of living situation that is befalling not only this country, of course, but the whole of the Western world. We're seeing average inflation in the Eurozone at about 10%. We're seeing inflation in the United Kingdom at just over that, at 11%. We're seeing inflation in the United States coming down a little bit now, but that's only after the United States Federal Reserve raised their interest rates, raised their mortgage rates to higher than that in the that we're seeing in the United Kingdom. So really what we're seeing here is a very difficult situation that lots of countries are grappling with how they may well challenge it. We saw, of course, in the United States, that's come through much higher mortgage rates than in the United Kingdom even, which have risen themselves. But ultimately, all of these difficult decisions are not yet getting inflation down to manageable levels. And that means that we're seeing enormous pay demands from many sectors. Of course, average pay in the private sector is going up by just about half that of inflation, around 5%, but average pay in the public sector is very variable, and it depends. If you're on a lower pay tariff in the public sector, you may well be getting a higher pay increase, but if you're on a higher pay tariff, you may well be getting a lower pay increase. It's very variable, and what we're seeing is a response from these unions trying to ask for more and seeing how much they can get. With the case of the nurses, a 19% pay rise demand is the demand from that group, which clearly both the Conservative Party and the Labour Party have said is unaffordable. But you can't help but think this is sort of bargaining positioning for many of these groups. And it will be very interesting to see how many of these groups end up walking back from their initial demand and settle at something more reasonable.
Okay. And Tom, do we know if Rishi Sunak is cooking up a statement to make at some point between now and Christmas? How is he going to handle this and to look like he's not being held to ransom by the workers in this country?
Yes, it's a charge that Rishi Sunak has faced from the Labour Party now for 3 weeks in a row, that he is weak, that he is being pushed around by vested interests and the rest of it. But ultimately, the Prime Minister is preparing some sort of strikes task force, we learn, in Number 10, cooking up ways in which these strikes can be handled. We've heard stories in the last few weeks, of course, that the army may well be brought in to drive ambulances and the rest of it. it. That's number 10 not yet confirming that that's taking place in any parts of the country at this stage, but it's certainly a possibility with plans being drawn up to that effect. But ultimately, a lot of the cards are being kept close to the chest of the government. They don't want to give away their game plan to the unions. This is a game of cat and mouse to some extent between what the unions are planning and when they are going to place their strikes and what the government can do in response. Ultimately, these unions want to cause maximum disruption, to have maximum leverage, and the government is trying to minimise that disruption, but often doing so fumbling around in the dark.
OK, thank you very much. Tom Harwood there, our political correspondent at 10 Downing Street. I'm joined now in the studio by my panellists for today, but former Labour MP Stephen Pound and also Edwina Currie, former Conservative MP. Good morning, Edwina. Can I just read this to you to start with? Andy Prendergast, who's the GMB National Secretary, has said that health workers have had enough of public schoolboys who run the government and simply don't care about their pay demands. Is this to some extent a class war going on?
No, it isn't, Bev. Good morning. It's a conspiracy. Now, you know, and Stephen knows, that I'm not normally a conspiracy theorist, but a number of very senior people in the trade unions, some very, very old-fashioned people with some Marxist or communist sympathies, one or two of them, people who also, of course, are funding the Labour Party and have always done so. These people have put their heads together and said, let's create a winter of discontent. Let's make life extremely difficult for this government, recognising that since we're on our third Prime Minister this year, and the Conservatives are entirely responsible for that, I accept that, and that this is a government that will have to give in. Now, Conservative governments have given in the past. I remember Ken Clarke as Secretary of State for Health many years ago saying, oh, for heaven's sake, just pay the nurses, and giving them an 18% pay rise. Now, the problem with that is, first of all, it encourages everybody else to do exactly the same. Secondly, of course, it then builds in inflation into the system, which makes life even harder, as we've heard described, for everyone else, and particularly for the majority of workers who are in the private sector. The private sector can't pay that kind of wages or the business goes bust. Now, what we have to get our head around, in my view, is that we need to tweak legislation if necessary, and we need to use it. Most of these strikes are being called on a minority vote. If you take the ambulance drivers, for example, they've had 83,000 yes, but they've got 330,000 members. So that strikes me as a no. And when it comes to the Royal College of Nursing, the same thing applies. In England, which is by far the bulk of our population, the bulk of our National Health Service trusts, a minority, fewer than half of the trusts, actually produced a positive vote for a strike. Now, as I read that, Bev, it means they don't have a mandate for a strike. And they certainly don't have a mandate to cause pain and misery, to have picket lines where patients in pain have got to cross a picket line, being put up with all the abuse that results. And there could well be a Labour MP on that picket line as well, encouraging the strikers, instead of helping those people for whom these great public services were set up in the first place.
Stephen Pound, let me bring you in. This is all Labour's fault, and it's all union members who are supporting Labour.
Hello, Edwina. Nice to see you. Look, where I disagree with you, I'm afraid to say I disagree fundamentally about this, is the idea that somehow this is in any way Labour in hock to the unions. It's just like saying that the Tory party are in hock to the hedge fund managers and the merchant bankers. Which just over half of our money actually comes from the unions, and it's a decreasing amount. But where you do make a very, very important point, there are certain people in certain unions, I'm thinking of unions like the RMT, which is not only not affiliated to Labour, but stands candidates against Labour at elections. They have within their ranks people who are dedicated to the destruction of global capitalism. They want to smash the system and they want to bring into a workers' paradise. I'd be interested to know what the parameters of the workers' paradise are. I've been looking for them most of my adult life. But there are people who are just simply using this. And that's the real problem. Because the other thing which you say is very, very perceptive, there are so many people, the majority of people in this country, they're not unionised. The amount of people within unions is declining year on year, and it's being concentrated pretty much in local government, public services, local government. It's the rest of those people who are suffering. But here's what's happening. Every general secretary of every trade union is now faced with a membership saying, well, hang on a second, there's an accelerating process. If they get 19%, we want 20%, because if they get 19%, then what's going to happen to the economy is more and more people, the price of goods will go up, and that's the real problem. So there's huge pressure on them. But I think the government has actually got a Secretary of State for Health, it's got a Secretary of State for Business, Enterprise and Industrial Strategy, it's got a Secretary of State for Transport. I don't think government should micromanage industrial relations, but they should actually say, we're here to help and to assist, because at the end of the day, governments, the Labour Party, the Conservative Party, don't represent a sectional interest. They represent the whole nation, and I think they need to start doing that.
So, Edwina Curry, what would you do if you were in Rishi Sunak's position today? Would you start with communications, with trying to reach agreements, with appealing to the better nature of these employees, to say we've got an NHS in crisis, we've got people trying to get their lives back on track following the pandemic? What would you do?
Well, I think Stephen's got a point when he suggests that the various secretaries of state where their departments are threatened by strikes need to put their heads together and have a concerted approach to all of this, so that one isn't getting picked off at the expense of another. I think that would be extremely useful. But I think they should take a leaf out of Tony Blair's book. One of the key things that Tony Blair's government had was a rebuttal department, which I think was run by some very senior people. And whenever a subject or a topic came up where it didn't tell the government story, immediately there was a rebuttal. So it shouldn't be left to people like me to quote the sort of figures I've just been doing. The government is absolutely right to say we can't afford those pay rises, but I think they could make a much stronger argument that these strikes are not legitimate. They are effectively wildcat strikes. They are similar to the kind of illegal strikes that we used to have in the 70s and the 80s. I think they need to tighten up the legislation, and I think they need to use it. They would get full support of all the Conservative members in the House of Commons to get some changes through, drive through some changes in trade union law, just like Margaret Thatcher did. And she brought an end to these strikes and helped to create a world in which hardworking people could actually get to work, could get the healthcare they needed, could have some pride in the job, and indeed it enhanced the reputation of the country as a whole and aided its future prosperity.
Is there much for you to disagree with there, Stephen?
I don't think Margaret Thatcher is the best role model here, because she did introduce legislation to sequester the funds of trade unions, which on paper look brilliant. The reality is, though, if you simply say to the train drivers, you can't strike, they'll simply say, oh, I'm sick. I can't come in, or there's a problem with the cab. So I think we've got to work with the grain of the nation, and I think the grain of the nation actually doesn't want strikes, no question about that. But neither do most strikers want strikes. So I think we need to actually get talking, but above all, the single most crucial, important thing is to actually create the economic circumstances and the stability in the economy where people aren't looking over the edge of a cliff and saying, look, I can't afford my gas, I can't afford my electricity, I can't afford my mortgage. Because if there's one thing that stimulates strikes more than anything else, it's financial insecurity. And that's where the government does have an absolute key task.
OK.
Yeah, but the problem with that argument is that the train drivers who are going on strike are on £55,000, £60,000 a year. And the average wage of a qualified nurse, the ones who are going on strike, is £37,000 a year. They're hardly poor workers.
OK.
Didn't say they were.
Thank you both so much. Labour MP Stephen Pound, who's staying with me this morning, and Edwina Curry, former Conservative MP.
And Minister.
Yes, thank you very much.
Sorry.
All right, rein your neck in. You're only a guest. Stop being my researcher. Right. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Tell us what you think. You can also tweet at GBNews. There's a poll up right now asking, in light of Lady Susan Hussey, behave yourself, stepping down from the royal family, is it racist to ask somebody, where are you from? 91% of you are saying no. We're going to be discussing that on my panel in just a moment, but do keep your votes coming in. We have got lots more to get through. We're going to be talking about these ambulance strikes a bit more in our panel and loads more. Time for a quick break.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
And it's about standards and public life. No, I'll tell you what's hypocrisy, Narendra.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin.
We believe in the UK.
No bias, no censorship.
It just doesn't make sense to me. He wasn't doing his job as Chancellor.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
I think I've seen probably quite enough of Matt Hancock to last me a lifetime.
I'll also be getting to know you better, travelling to find out what you think about the politicians who are fighting for your vote.
They've got to get this country back on track.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. only on GB News, on TV, radio and online.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other pay-per-review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back. You are watching and listening to Bev Turner today. My panel are back in the room with me. Labour MP Stephen Pound. I've got him on a very short leash. Author James Bloodworth is here as well. And broadcaster and journalist Johnny Gould. Right, James. Brexit has cost UK households £5.8 billion in higher food bills. How can they possibly know?
So, I mean, the headline here is leaving the EU's added an average of £210 to Britain's shopping bills over 2 years. And just to kind of simplify it, one of the things that's happening is I've spoken to friends of mine who run businesses, and I've heard similar anecdotes from them. But to kind of ship goods into Europe now, you have to do more paperwork, there are more costs involved, and then they're passing those costs onto the consumer, onto the public. So it's hitting us in the pocket. In our food bills in particular. So, I mean, I was kind of a soft Remainer. I voted Remain because I kind of thought the status quo, I felt kind of safer with the status quo. But I do respect the democratic right of people who chose Brexit. But I think it's undeniable that there has been a cost, especially in terms of red tape for business, and that's impacting the consumer. And I think there are several studies like this. I mean, the Bank of England has one of the head economists there has just said that Brexit's probably contributing to the inflationary pressures we're seeing at the moment. So there is, I mean, honest Leave voters, I think, were clear that, you know, there may be an economic cost, but it's worth it in terms of getting our democracy back, is what they would say. But I think I think we should be honest. I think Leavers should also be honest that it is costing us all money in leaving the EU.
Johnny Gould, it's costing us money leaving the EU.
Well, I think anybody that voted Leave, and I did,
and I'll put my hand up straight away. I voted Leave. I have no regrets in it. I recognise that there would be an economic cost, particularly in the short term. But for me, it was a price worth paying, and I think a lot of people that voted Leave still have the same attitude. I share your cynicism, Bev, in terms of how do we work this out? And I hate to say it, but this report was the CEP, the Centre for Economic Performance. Am I right in saying that the director, certainly, Stephen Makin, is also a professor at the London School of Economics, a university that I believe you went to?
Indeed, I did.
You did, right. So a university that has a reputation for being a little left-wing, would that be fair to say?
When I was elected president of the union, I was the first president of the union that had from the Labour Party for 10 years. I defeated 2 SDP people. So we aspired to be a bit left-wing, to be fair.
Well, you say you aspired, but I actually applied to the LSE, never going to get in, never bright enough. But my mum got very upset, saying, "Oh, that's that left-wing university son." She got very nervous, and I was going,
not during my presidential year.
But seriously, to be honest, I said to her, "You're being absolutely ridiculous, Mum. It's not that bad." I went for my interview. I couldn't get in. They were picketing me outside the front. They wouldn't allow me in. There was a strike going on.
That was personal. That wasn't political.
So what you're saying then, fellas, is that what you would say, Johnny, is that they've picked the figures. I think it's personally impossible to tell what the impact of the pandemic has been on our finances. How can we ever extrapolate
but not
what the
just
effects
the
was of
pandemic.
Brexit and also pandemic?
Bev, I think that's a valid
and
point.
the war.
But the war in Ukraine, the energy crisis, we are in the perfect storm. So how do you decipher with this amount of accuracy what the direct impact of Brexit is? I'm not arguing at all that there hasn't been an impact. There's no question. But the point you made is the red tape has increased costs for anybody doing business with Europe from this country. It works the other way. So these governments need to sit down. Europe needs to sit down with the Brits, recognise that we have left the European Union and find a way through this that doesn't impact on both them and us.
See,
it's madness.
I too was a soft Remainer. Didn't like you, James. It just felt my instinct was probably safer in the club than being outside of it. Now I am delighted that we're outside of it, particularly because they're pushing through the idea of a digital ID tied to your health system, particularly because the EU is also putting restrictions on Twitter and saying that if you want to use Twitter in the EU, you have to abide by our rules of censorship. I'm quite glad we're out now.
We could still be in the single market and not abide by some of those rules, but we'd lose the tariffs.
Well, don't forget, I mean, we were recused for most of that anyway, but we're still cooperating, things like Europol and things like that. But for me, one of the biggest things, I entirely take your point, we can't factor Ukraine out of this, we can't factor, the pandemic and all that business. It is going to break up the United Kingdom, quite simply because the Irish situation is insoluble. There's absolutely no way you can have a border on the 302 miles from Donegal to Dundalk without it being defended, protected and subsequently attacked. Michael Collins did a lot for the unification of Ireland. Boris Johnson has done much more. I cannot see how we can solve that issue. And if Ireland becomes 32-county Ireland again, what's the message to Scotland? I think this has huge constitutional impact, massive.
But the majority of Ireland already is unified, and if the majority of people in Northern Ireland want to be unified, I mean geographically, Southern Ireland is an awful lot larger than obviously.
Well, no,
Northern
I agree. I mean, I remember when I was serving in Northern Ireland, somebody said to me, "Well, we do have a border in Ireland. We call it the beach."
But I could never understand, sorry, Bev, there's one point I do want to make. I could never understand why people in Northern Ireland that wanted to unite Ireland completely use guns and violence. Because at the end of the day, majority rules. So just make sure that there are more Catholics than there are Protestants. And guess what? There are now. They've just come out with the figures in recent months.
But hang on a second. I mean, if you're a Catholic in Derry in the 1970s, 1980s, you had to have 15 votes for one Protestant vote. So, believe you me, gerrymandering was brutal in the North of Ireland back in those days. But ultimately, you're right. I would be a ballot box, not an Armalite person. But I have to say, I think that a united Ireland is going to be one of the unintended consequences of Brexit.
And of course, you've got Nicola Sturgeon trying to push for another referendum in the north.
Yeah, well, good luck with that.
Well, obviously, she's been pushed back at this particular stage. But it does feel like, James, doesn't it, that we are living in very precarious times in terms of the union of Great Britain and where we sit on the global stage.
Yeah, I mean, Scotland was very pro-Remain. So, I mean, I take the point about these figures. It's hard to discern what the cost to us as individuals is. But I think even the CBI has talked about the cost of business of Brexit. And I think if you're a Scottish voter, you live in a territory where most people supported Remain. I think it does hurt to be told that it's costing you money to be outside the European Union, and especially when you have a party you can vote for that would promise to take you back in, or at least try to take you back into Europe.
It's interesting that there's not a cat and hell's chance of Scotland as an independent country joining the European Union. Spain would immediately veto it because of Catalonia. You did have the situation with Silesia, with Brittany, with all over Europe. There's people would absolutely veto that. So I actually weep sometimes for Nicola. I know some people may allow themselves a brief moment of gloating, but I mean, she's in a dreadful position here. And I think we've got to have some proper, serious devolution. Otherwise, I think we split.
As a Brexiteer, Johnny, if Rishi Sunak, and as I said several times, I don't feel that his heart is in the protection of this country. I think he is one of those people who is a true citizen of the planet. Him and his wife will probably retire. They won't retire to the home counties. They will retire to one of their many houses around the world.
California.
It's a California. If he were to suggest closer ties again with Europe, how would that go down in the country, do you think?
How would it go down with the country, or how would it go down with me?
With Brexiteers and 51%. Badly.
I'm a great believer in democracy. And at the end of the day, if there was a huge movement saying that we have to have another vote, as much as I think that would be a disaster in terms of the turmoil it would cause, I would always be respectful of the will of the people. And if the vast majority want to return and want to explore that, then I would tip my hat and say, OK, fair bet. But
when Rishi was asked that, it was actually one of his few good jokes. Sometime, you know, when he actually lost to Liz Truss. Remember Liz Truss?
Yes.
And he said to her, well, OK, you know, you lot, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking I'm going to be... Monday morning, I'm going to be on the first plane to California. It's not true. No way. Fares are much cheaper on Tuesday.
See, it would be funny if it wasn't so close to the bone, wasn't it? But anyway, moving on. Now, new research has shown that 6 in 10 older teens in England have potential eating problems. I'm going to be joined by a nutritionist and a behavioural psychologist to help us understand this worrying trend. That's all after the news with Tamsin.
Bev, thank you. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom at 11:31. Dozens of NHS traffic control centres are now operating across England to ease pressures on the health system. More than 40 so-called winter war rooms have been established to help find beds faster for patients. Staff will use data to divert ambulances away from hospitals at capacity to ones with more space. The plan comes after ambulance workers voted in favour of industrial action. Nurses are also set to walk out later this month over a pay dispute. Prince William's trip to Boston has been overshadowed by the race row, which was triggered by his godmother. On day one of their visit, the Prince and Princess of Wales received a mixed reaction during an NBA game, with some people in the crowd booing as they were introduced to the stadium. It's after Lady Susan Hussey was forced to apologise and resign for repeatedly asking the founder of a domestic abuse charity, Ngozi Fulani, where she really came from during a royal reception. British Gas will pay its customers for reducing the amount of energy they use during peak times to help take pressure off the grid. The UK's largest supplier hopes 100,000 customers will sign up to the scheme. Households will be paid around £4 for every unit of electricity they cut their consumption by at specific times. UK house prices have seen their biggest fall in 2 years, with nationwide figures showing they dropped 1.4% in November. That's after a month-on-month fall in October. The average house price was £263,788. St Ives has been crowned Britain's happiest place to live. The Cornish seaside town overtook Hexham in Northumberland to take the top spot in Rightmove's annual survey. Rightmove says St Ives scored highly for its sense of community spirit and belonging for its residents. Well done to them. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by 2 of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Very good morning. It's 11:36 a.m. This is Bev Turner today on GB News. You have been sending in your views. We've got this Twitter poll running at the moment over this royal racism storm, as the tabloids are calling it, as am I. This is Lady Hussey, who was at an event and she was asked by a charity worker, she asked a charity worker where she was from. The lady has relayed this conversation from her point of view. There's nobody there to verify whether this is actually what has been said, but the fact that Lady Hussey asked her this several times and she was saying, well, I'm from London, even though she was clearly black, and she has resigned over this matter because the woman in question called her racist for asking this several times. Mark has said, just to say how uncomfortable I feel about Susan Hussey's resignation. She is of her generation. We all know older people who don't get modern terminology and mores, but Buckingham Palace, including William, fear a PR disaster. I couldn't agree more. She's 83. And in fact, she is 83 is trending on Twitter at the moment. There are a lot of people defending that. Liz has said, of course, Lady Susan shouldn't have been made to resign. She was in front of someone dressed in African-style clothing, and to make conversation, she asked the woman where she comes from. This is bullying of an old lady by an alleged victim. And Russell said Lady Hussey only wanted to know Fulani's heritage, which could have been easily answered. What do you think? GB Views at gbnews.uk. I'm going to be discussing this with my panel as well in just a little while. Now, a new survey from the NHS of mental health in children and young people has discovered that 6 in 10 older teens in England have possible eating problems, with those aged 20 to 23 affected the most. These figures are deeply concerning, but what is the main factor causing this increase? Well, joining me now is nutritionist Monica Price and Joe Hemmings, behavioural psychologist. Ladies, thank you both for joining me very much. These stats are shocking, but Joe, I would say that if you have any young people in your life, not remotely surprising, if you know what I mean. Why is this happening to younger people? Why are they having such complicated relationships with food?
Yeah, it's not that shocking or surprising, but it's worrying because what they're essentially doing is flagging up the bit before it turns into a full-blown eating disorder. So they're looking at young people's relationship with food, which is not good. I mean, there's a number of reasons. One is, general stress and anxiety. There's a bit of overspill from COVID lockdown where people felt they had control over their lives and they were very fearful. And obviously all their schooling at that time, education, was interrupted. But also there's a lot going on social media. There's a lot of hashtags that might be a girl's name or something seemingly innocent, but actually what they are telling you how to do these things, how to basically achieve an eating disorder, how to be thin. When you're thin, you're successful, and you'll be happy. And it's this, I think, coming from social media that's particularly worrying. It's regulated to a degree, but these hashtags, which we won't necessarily know, but young people do, it's a lot of peer group pressure basically coming in from TikTok, YouTube, whatever it may be.
If I can come to you, Monica, we all have, don't we, I would say, an emotional relationship to food in some way. What's going wrong for these young people, would you say?
Yes, good morning, Bev. This is really a shocking survey, and again, I kind of echo what Joe said. I'm not surprised by this survey, but I'm very worried by it. And this is a young generation who are now looking at food in a totally different way. They're not even enjoying food. I see so many young people now who are more worried about the food, but not exactly the types of food they're eating, just how that food is going to make them look. Is it going to make them put on weight? They're not eating because they don't want to put on weight. So we have a real problem now with the relationship just with food. And we all need food. There's no such thing as unhealthy food. Every food that we have will have some kind of nutritional value. But the children have kind of lost this. And this survey, Bev, was done, I think the ages were between 7 and 24. And it was just under 3,000. So this was a very broad survey, and to discover that nearly 3/4 of the girls in particular have some kind of problem, and the way that they call that is something like they might feel ashamed because they're eating too much. They may feel ashamed because they're not eating enough. It might be because their body appearance, they're not happy with their appearance. It could be stress, it could be anxiety. But of course, all these things, all these problems will have then a much higher risk of them actually leading to an eating disorder like anorexia or bulimia, for example, which are very serious eating disorders.
So, Joe, what might the warning signs be for parents who might have teenagers in their life? We're not talking at this stage about, as you say, clinically diagnosed anorexia or bulimia. So what is it? What does it look like to parents?
I think, it certainly looks like to parents, if you see your child either gaining a lot of weight quickly or losing a lot of weight quickly, that's a key. If they're eating away from the family, if they're going to their rooms to eat, or saying they've already eaten, that might be to do with shame. Again, if they're going to the loo a lot, I mean, although this sort of research doesn't say bulimia itself, it's the start of bulimia. Again, if you begin to do that, you begin to vomit up your food. So it's looking for changes in your child's behaviour around, as Monica says, the relationship with food. I mean, what are they doing? If they're eating with you, are they actually pushing stuff, under something to hide it? Are they rushing off on the table, something else to do? You'll just notice a change in behaviour. Now, if that persists, every child goes through a moment when they think I'm not hungry or I've got something better to do. But if you see that, consistently and repeatedly, then I think it's a big red flag.
Yeah. So, Monica, what can we do as parents then to encourage good relationships with food and a healthy attitude towards mealtime?
I think the best thing to do, Bev, is just not make it stressful. As a parent myself, from the moment they're born, we want to feed them. It's an intuition from a mother or a parent to feed your child. Make that mealtime as less stressful as possible, because if somebody's having these problems and not having this positive relationship with food, then we need to kind of take a step back and just say perhaps little and often, as opposed to the kind of standard 3 meals a day kind of thing that we tend to do in the UK. Also variety. Don't give the same things. Variety is very important, and really the most important thing, Bev, is to talk, is to find some way to communicate with your child. There are many wonderful local support groups and charities out there that can help that child. And I would say, as a nutritionist, it's one of the most common things I'm seeing at the moment. Parents are getting in touch with me, wanting to know what they can do with their child. Sit and listen. And it's very easy, I think, for an adult, isn't it, to give their opinion. But it's really important that you just sit and listen to your child and understand their fears.
Yeah. I love the fact that you say don't make a big deal out of it. I mean, my kids have been coming home on these cold winter nights and reaching for the biscuit tin or a packet of crisps, you know. And so the other day I just made a big platter of, like, a dead quick, chopped up red peppers, carrots, tomatoes, cucumber, and I just sort of left it on the side when they came in. I didn't say anything. And of course, guess what? They all came in and we said, oh, we're starving. And they just all ate a load of that before. And you know, reverse psychology, right, on these teenagers. They're difficult enough as it is. Ladies, thank you so much. Nutritionist Monica Price there and behavioural psychologist Joe Hemmings. Now, as we approach Christmas, North Yorkshire Police's Drink and Drug Drive campaign has begun. Officers are encouraging the public to ring 999 if they see any unsafe driving. Anna Riley has the story.
Save a life and call it in. That's the message that North Yorkshire Police are spreading this month to prevent families facing Christmas without loved ones because of drink drivers. Members of the public are being urged to call 999 if they suspect anyone's behind the wheel when under the influence. And police are conducting spot roadside checks to breathalyse motorists.
We're seeing more and more fatalities, high proportion, which alcohol or drugs is involved. And that's not just necessarily like drink driving on the night of drinking, it's also the following morning as well. So it's really key, really, to try and reduce the amount of serious collisions that we have and fatalities, because it has devastating effects, not for only those people who are involved, but also families, communities, and for emergency service workers who are also obviously attending those scenes.
Traffic Constable Jerry Tunney says motorists should look out for people driving well under the speed limit, swerving or not having their lights on.
Coming up to Christmas, obviously you've got more people going out on Christmas do's. People do tend to drink that bit more, I think, and unfortunately the temptation is always there for individuals to get into the vehicle afterwards and drive, and all I'd say is think about your actions and don't. And for those who do see people doing that, please ring us. You know, you could be saving a life by doing so.
If a person's found guilty of drink driving, they can be fined, banned from the roads, or even sent to prison.
You probably can't go to work. Without a driving licence, you can't go and see your family. What if you've got ill family that they rely on you for care? You then can't use a car to go and see them. You can't go and do your shop. You can't do your Christmas shop. Like, the implications of not having a driving licence are huge, and it's only when people are sat in a small concrete room looking up do they realise, oh dear.
The fire service come to the rescue in serious collisions and suggest drivers stay clear of alcohol altogether.
If people are going out this year, please be mindful, leave the car at home or get a taxi, train or bus. One of the things we don't want to be doing is seeing people on dark, wintry roads, having to cut them out of the vehicles.
The campaign runs from now until January the 1st, and police will be publishing regular updates of arrests made. Anna Riley, GB News, Harrogate.
In Cambridge, the people who...
Right, we have a very talkative panel here, all chatting away. Let me reintroduce you to them. Former Labour MP Stephen Pound is here, author James Bloodworth, and broadcaster and journalist Johnny Gould. Right, Stephen, we're going to be talking about prisons. It's funny, isn't it? It's not been a topic. There are times we go through when prisons and the state of our penal service is all over the press. We haven't really talked about it for a while. There's been quite a lot of other stuff going on. And it looks like they're in an absolute mess, aren't they? The capacity is triggering emergency plans to use police cells instead.
I know. I mean, the thing with prisons is out of sight, out of mind.
That's right.
And I always thought it was very salutary that they... I actually had to go to prison for 2 or 3 weeks as part of one of these fact-finding things. It was called At the Sharp End. It was like an early reality thing.
Right.
And I was in Dartmoor, and one of the figures that I remember was I think there were just over 80,000 people in prisons in England and Wales then, which was twice the number of people there were in the Royal Navy, which I think is pretty terrifying. But look, what this is about is actually about temporary people who are remanded on bail or remanded in custody from the magistrates' courts. Now, if you take my borough of Ealing, we used to have a police station in Norwood Green. We had cells there in Southall, in Greenford, in Ealing. All gone. And it seems like in the last 20 years we've been selling everything and now we're trying to rebuild it. So you've now got, if you get arrested in West London, you get taken to Heathrow Airport, a place called Polo. There's a little holding cell in the middle of Heathrow Airport. And if you're from Hillingdon or Hounslow or Ealing, that's where you go. Absolutely ridiculous. So what terrifies me about it, really frightens me about this, but so somebody who is a proven wrong 'un, a real villain, who's normally would be remanded in custody till maybe from the Magistrates' Court to the Crown Court. They're going to be roaming the streets. But there's another group of people who have been forgotten about this. This is the young people who are supposed to be placed in secure accommodation. Because we've now got people with knives round our way, people killing each other, 16 years old. You get taken up into court, the magistrate will originally hear the case. Then are you going to send that 16-year-old boy out onto the street? No, they should be in secure accommodation or, if necessary, in a police cell. And if we're going to be using the prisons for that, then all we're doing is squeezing the toothpaste tube in one place and it'll bulge up in another. So we're just setting up problems. We close the police stations, we're closing the prisons, we privatise the prisons. I think what we need is more prisons, because it's not an admission of failure. I think it's an admission of sense. And I think Dickens said you can always judge a society by the way it teaches its prisoners. At the moment, our prisoners actually, a funny thing to say this, but they actually deserve something better than they're getting at the moment. Above all, the state deserves it.
What do you think, James?
Yeah, I agree with much of that. I think the issue we have with prisons at the moment shows how short-sighted some of the austerity policies were from 2010 onwards. So there are 10,000 fewer prison places now than there were in 2010. And this is from the party, supposedly the Conservatives, a party of law and order. I think we should recalibrate the prison population too. So I think some people who are in there for non-violent offences, I think there should be more of an approach, rehabilitative approach to that. But I do think I'm quite firm on law and order when it comes to violent crimes.
Yeah.
I think people should get stiffer sentences for crimes involving violence, and I think more people should actually be locked up for those things. But you have to actually fund the service properly and have the prison places to do that.
Traditionally, in times of economic strife, like now, we get more crimes of stealing. In times of economic boom, we get more violent crime, interestingly, Johnny, traditionally. So we're looking at a time when people are going to be being arrested probably for shoplifting and stealing and selling things out of the back of the car, arguably to make ends meet. So I'm not excusing it, but I'm saying there are some desperate people out there. Should those people be in prison? Big question, I know. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Well, at the end of the day, my view has always been how much of a threat to society is someone, ultimately, for whatever crime they've committed. And if they're not a threat to society, then there should be other means with which they are punished that are more appropriate to the crime that they've caused. At the end of the day, what we're seeing here, I mean, you've got to remember the barristers' strike hasn't helped the situation. A lot more prisoners in remand, and that's obviously added to the situation that we find ourselves in. But the point that both Steve and James make is absolutely spot on. This is all about reaction to the reality right now instead of planning ahead. And the reality is we need more prisons. That's the simple truth. They need to build the infrastructure and we need to plan in advance. And what we've been seeing over the last decade or two is the exact opposite. And therefore, this is the perfect storm that you create.
Yeah. And also, Stephen, don't you think this has to start also in education? We need to be educating particularly young boys. I know that's a bit sexist, but most crimes are still committed by men. So that they're not pursuing a life of crime, whatever that means.
I say, Bev, it's not sexist at all. It's true. It's an expression of reality, and it's what the fact is. When I mentioned this thing that was in Dartmoor, one of the things I discovered very quickly was that 73% of the prisoners in Dartmoor were functionally illiterate. And I think a huge number of people in those days were people whose parents and themselves had worked in the pits in Wales, and they suddenly that job just didn't appear anymore. We have to educate people, but I mean, in all honesty, we could sit here for the next 24 hours and we could probably come up with some fairly sensible ideas, but it's a huge issue. Right now, education, medium to long term, short term, build a few nicks.
Can I very quickly pick up on that, Bev?
Go on, because we've got to talk about Lady Hussey.
My capacity as a charity auctioneer, I work for the School of Hard Knocks, I work for Delalio Rugby Works, basically two charities doing the same thing, and that is focusing on kids that have been left outside of the system, that have been forced out of school due to behaviour issues, violence, etc. The success they have using rugby and sport as the core of the values that they instil and the re-education and giving them a sense of worth, they have something like an 80% success rate. And without them, 80% of these kids are going to end up in jail. It's a simple fact.
Absolutely. Right. This is the big story that a lot of the press is talking about today. This is Lady Hussey, 83. She was the Queen's lady-in-waiting. She was her confidant. She was the Queen's companion to Prince Philip's funeral. She's Prince William's godmother. I mean, she's a big part of the royal institution. She's resigned because she had this conversation with a charity worker, a lady called Ngozi Fulani. And in this exchange, there's the lady on the evening in question. In this exchange, 83-year-old Lady Hussey said to her, "Where are you from?" And she said, I'm from London. And she said, no, but where are you really from? Now, we're taking this because this lady's given us her account of events. And this has been blown up, in my opinion, out of all proportion. There is no place in this world for true racial discrimination. But my feeling is that stories like this detract, James, from actual true discrimination against people on the basis of their colour.
I do think that the accusations leave a bad taste in the mouth. So I think there is a way to ask someone where they're from, what their heritage is. But I think I've only read one side's account of this. I think we should make that clear. I've only read one side's account. But from reading that, it seems, at the very least, like a faux pas. It seems like someone was quite rude. They've asked someone where they're from. They've said London, and they've pressed and said, where are you really from? And they should have. They seem to lack social etiquette when in asking this. I think it could be construed. I think it could be construed as racist. Yes. I mean, I don't want to live in a country where asking someone where they're from, asking what their heritage is automatically branded racist. But I didn't. It left a bad taste in the mouth reading this account.
It's a very divisive issue. Should we be a little more forgiving of Lady Hussey because she's 83, Stephen?
I think we should. I mean, obviously one has sympathy for Ngozi Fulani, but I'm not entirely sure why she felt it necessary to give us a blow-by-blow a great list of this. I mean, Lady Hussey, she was married to Marmaduke Hussey, who was the chairman of governors at the BBC.
Of course he was,
you think she'd be sort of fairly aware of these things. But look, this is like the apocryphal thing about the Southend by-election when they interviewed a candidate and said, "Where are you?" who happened to be black, and they said, "Where are you from?" And they said, "Well, Southend." Said, "But where were you born?" Southend. Yeah, but where were you born before that? I mean, you do get that. But what's interesting about it being blown out of proportion, there's a few people here I know from West London, and by and large, we tend to come from either Irish or half Irish. When you meet somebody else from that, the first thing you say is, where are you from, back home? Equally, if you're Lady Hussey, and I've been on these receiving lines, as you have many times, when the Queen comes down, she asks two questions. So, have you come far? And where are you from?
Yeah.
It's what you do. So I think the problem here is initially it was perfectly sound. It then became crass and embarrassing.
Who knows? I mean, I would also say it's she's 83. It's a very noisy gathering. Could she hear her properly? We just don't know. And I just hate the fact that also that Prince William has not defended her. And he said, we have no place for this. Gentlemen, I've got to finish. Johnny, I wanted last word to you, but we've run out of time. You'll have to come back again very soon.
Love to.
Won't you? Our poll result, 91% of you said that this was not an act of racism, which I have to say I think common sense has prevailed there. Right, we've come to the end of the show. I'll be back on Monday. Coming up next is GB News Day with Mark Longhurst. I'm Bev Turner. I'll see you soon.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Foggy for many of us this morning and into the afternoon. That fog sticking around in places. It'll feel cold when that happens. But for the north of England, Scotland and Northern Ireland, we've seen cloudier skies overnight. That's kept the fog away and the frost away. But it has brought some outbreaks of rain, weather front moving through. And that will continue to bring damp weather to Scotland, to the north of England as well during the afternoon. Mostly the rain light and on and off, but it's fairly persistent for the Northern Isles, the far north and northeast of Scotland. Something a little drier for the Western Isles as well as Northern Ireland by the afternoon. For the south of the UK, a mixture of sunny spells, but also some of that dense fog sticking around. Where the fog sticks around, it's going to feel cold, 2 to 5 Celsius. Where we get the sunshine, 9 to 11 degrees. But in the south, once again overnight, we're going to see that fog reform and become extensive across central and southern parts of the UK. So East Wales through to the Midlands into southern counties of England. Very poor visibilities on the roads first thing, and it's going to feel cold with temperatures hovering near zero. Scotland and Northern Ireland, meanwhile, sees cloudier conditions and some of those outbreaks of rain persisting across eastern Scotland and the far north of England. The rain tends to peter out during Friday, and actually for many places it's drier, although showers will continue to feed into the far southeast as well as parts of East Anglia by the end of the afternoon. A strengthening easterly breeze will lift the fog, and so brighter skies are expected later Friday, but that easterly is going to make it feel colder as we head into the weekend. So change on the way for the weekend. It looks like we'll see less fog by night, but we'll also see this easterly wind bring increasingly showery weather from the North Sea, those showers falling as rain at lower levels and snow over the hills, and it will feel cold in the wind.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something good happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky. That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak.
Stop talking. My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
And it's about standards and public life. No, I'll tell you what's hypocrisy, Narendra.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin.
We believe in the UK.
No bias, no censorship.
It just doesn't make sense to me. He wasn't doing his job as Chancellor.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, it's 12 noon. You're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up today, the NHS preparing for strike action. Nearly 1 in 3 patients arriving at hospital by ambulance last week waiting at least 30 minutes, more than 15% waiting more than an hour to get into A&E. How can the government sort out the looming health crisis? We'll be analysing the issue in depth. Rishi Sunak now seen as one of the worst performing cabinet ministers by his own Tory party members. That's according to the latest survey of the grassroots. It comes as pressure grows from backbenchers to act on the migrant crisis. That royal race row, Ngozi Fulani says she's still not had an apology from Buckingham Palace. She'll be with us live here on the programme a little later and saying the incident was racist. We'll also reflect on the Prince and Princess Wales being booed as they attended a basketball game in Boston. And it's bye-bye Ian Blackford. He's standing down as the SNP's leader at Westminster. We'll have the latest reaction to that breaking news. First, though, all the other news headlines with Tamsin.
Mark, thank you, and good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. Dozens of NHS traffic control centres are now operating across England to ease pressures on the health system. More than 40 so-called winter war rooms have been established to help find beds faster for patients. Staff will use data to divert ambulances away from hospitals at capacity to ones with more available space. The plan comes after ambulance workers voted in favour of industrial action. NHS staff will also walk